In Conversation with Dr. Eve.
Dr. Eve joins us now. Dr. Eve, good evening to you, and thank you so much for your time as always. We're talking about rejection and the trauma thereof this evening. Good evening to you, Doc.
Hi, Aubrey. So nice to be with you as always. And love the way you throw me right in there.
Yeah.
Political rejection. Never thought about that.
Ah, yes, indeed. Okay,
Right?
yes.
Right? You
Absolutely.
just put me right in that spot. So,
Indeed.
yeah. I was thinking as you were talking about that, that we are living in a time of collective trauma, and the politics of the world have certainly placed us into that place. So I wonder if it is impacting on people with the feeling of being rejected. Are you feeling rejected by Trump? Are you?
No, not really. I don't think that Trump is rejecting us. I think that what is happening in South Africa is that we are experiencing the consequences of a particular type of politics in America that we had grown quite dependent on. Yeah. And for me, I think this is a great opportunity for us to wean ourselves from that dependency. Of course, it's got serious consequences, particularly for our AIDS programs and so forth. But I think that this is a great opportunity for us to rediscover our independence and understand that the United States owes us nothing. They don't owe us this money. This is their taxpayer money. And they don't owe it to us. It's great that they were assisting us in our programs, but I have the opinion that says we are quite precious if we think they owe us this money.
You sound like my American children, Aubrey. we don't know anything. So I was thinking more in terms of like, this is a political betrayal. Does it feel like a betrayal? But you see it as something exciting and creative.
No. Trump is doing what Americans do. The betrayal comes from our leaders. The betrayal comes from the betrayal comes from President Cyril Ramaphosa saying that he is displeased with what Joburg and Gauteng is like. Well, I'm like, where have you been, bro? Your house is here in Joburg in Hyde Park. You should know how Joburg is.
He's on the road from me.
And Premier Panyaza Lesufi apologizing and conveniently adding that we've got a couple of cameras because that's a betrayal of the fact that people in Joburg. And this story is a microcosm of the South African reality. South Africa has been betrayed by our officials and our politicians who are so far removed from the realities, the lived realities of South Africa, that the lived realities of South Africa shocks them. So they live in some strange little bubble of luxury and enjoyment. That is the rejection that I'm feeling. It is people that we trusted. It's people that we thought understood our lived experiences, and they have just shown us the middle finger over and over and over and over again.
Yeah, so there is a blending actually of the rejection and the feeling of betrayal that comes with it. So tonight we're really talking about rejection, which is a betrayal, a huge betrayal in a way. But so it kind of could fall into the category of betrayal trauma as well. So you have a choice here, Aubrey. There are different forms of rejection, and I'm going to give you any, meeny, miny, mo. I'm going to give you the one to choose, and then of course we want our listeners to be able to jump into whichever one where they have felt the enormous hurt that comes from feeling rejected in one way or another. Because what the research shows us that it has real impact on mental well-being, usually leaving people feeling shame and guilt and impacting on self-esteem, and puts them at risk to abuse substances, food, and then always down the rabbit hole into loneliness and suicide. So, okay, Aubrey, take your pick. We can start with social media. And I'm going to introduce you to some new words, which I know I'm way older than you, but maybe they're new to you as well.
Yep.
Words like orbiting. I think you know ghosting. Orbiting was pretty new to me. Orbiting, ghosting, or rejection. We'll come back to that. So that's your number one choice. Then we can talk about the most obvious one of all, which is that of rejection by familial rejection and alienation from parents. LGBTIQA rejection, I mean, Trump's done a good job of kind of getting rid of that. Has had impacted on you? What kind of rejection have you experienced with that? And then we're also going to talk about peer rejection, which is enormously common, and absolutely impacts on people's adult lives, their intimacy, and of course on their sexuality as well. So take your pick. We either can start with family abandonment and rejection, social media, peer, and then if you are identified as anything other than monoheteronormative, maybe also you know that you are somebody who lives an alternative lifestyle and are feeling, outed, that you're othered. How does it feel for you not to be belonging? How does it impact on your feeling, on your mental well-being?
Yeah.
So which one are you drawn to?
I'm drawn to the familial rejection and betrayal because I suppose it's probably one that is felt by the largest demographic. And I'm sort of feeling like it would lead to the others too. So that's my choice. Yeah.
Okay, let's do that. Now, I'll tell you what really stood out for me. And, when you think you know everything until you know absolutely nothing, was that I learned something very important, which is the difference between estrangement, and you and I have had shows on estrangement before, and something called parental alienation. I don't know if you're familiar with that at all. And it happens when there's divorce. And I heard your superb interview the other night, I think it was Monday night, with your family lawyer who was talking about divorce.
Yes.
And here we have a situation in a divorce or a separation situation where one child aligns with one parent, the alienating parent, and unjustifiably rejects the other, the alienated parent. And this happens when through a divorce or a separation situation, the one parent will line up the child against the other one. And this causes profound losses for the child. And we know that, we talk a lot and you talk a lot about divorce and the impact of this, but this is something which I think needs to be brought to attention of people who are going through separations and divorces. The impact on the child, not just the squabbling over money and custody and family involvement, but what happens to the child. And what we know is that the child experiences profound losses when the one parent will turn the child against the other. They will create a narrative about the alienated parent to be able to align themselves with the child. So some of the losses that the child is going to experience is that they lose a sense of self. They lose experiences of childhood because they're only getting one family. They're only going to be exposed to one family. They lose the richness of multiple family dynamics and cultures and rituals. They lose community. And they lose all kinds of activities and relationships which are essential for healthy development. And they have ongoing, what we call bifurcation or ambiguous losses, and suffer enormous grief and isolation because they have been forced into almost disliking, finding that there's something profoundly wrong. And then when they get to adults, and it happens so frequently in my therapy room, where it's like, my mother always, told me these things about my dad, or my dad had an affair, and my mother, really forced us to alienate him and to be very angry with him. And then as an adult, I realized actually there's another story here. And look at the years of loss that I had, but not growing up with a father, or he's dying, or he's died. So I would love listeners to know if you have had that experience yourself as a child of being held back from a parent because of a separation situation. And then the one, of course, that is most common that you're referring to would be what we call child neglect, the invisibility, the abandonment and neglect of a child, the abandonment of a child. And it's interesting to look at, what is the actual definition of that. So I turn to the American Psychological Association, and they say child neglect is the denial of attention, care, affection, which is considered essential for the normal development of a child's physical, emotional, intellectual qualities, usually due to the indifference from or disregard by or impairment in the child's caregiver. And this child is enormously impacted. We have a whole lot of factors that impact on a child because, of course, the trauma of having that neglectful experience and being rejected by the person who you most need for survival in your life. And this is the person who I work with mostly in my therapy room, and we can look at the different kinds of effects that this rejection has on children into adult life. Adults will then say, I don't understand what's wrong with me. You know, I'm not able to concentrate. I can't keep a job, or I'm really abusing drugs or disordered eating, and I really have multiple affairs. And we kind of bring it down to looking at the core. What really happened to you as a child? Well, you know, I really didn't get a lot of attention. I think I was actually quite neglected. I was actually rejected. Well, that could be somebody who was adopted and feels, you know, I was really rejected in a very primal way at a primal time of my life. And we know that people who are adopted, you know, are at tremendous risk of self-harm, self-destructive mental health behavioral problems.
Sure. Give us a call, 011-883-0702. We're talking about rejection trauma. And we've started to have this conversation on the basis of familial rejection. Maybe you have a story of what that kind of trauma feels like, how it manifests itself, what your experience has been. But you've heard Dr. Eve explain some of the issues that are associated with that. I want to talk a little bit about the kind of rejection that is a little more subtle. Mm-hmm. The kind of rejection that is the copping out, no, maybe not copping out, but the non-engagement of parents or loved ones. Not because, not in a way that is completely overt, where somebody is beaten or chased away, but just quiet opting out, saying nothing, not being involved. I find that it is far more insidious, far more, and it provides people with a certain level of deniability that, no, I'm still here, but there's no engagement. People are no longer engaged and interested in the lives of their family members. They'll do the bare minimum. There's a wedding or there's a funeral, and they'll send a little card. But there's no longer a real engagement in the ups and downs of that family member. Is that a form of rejection?
Oh, Aubrey, I just kind of got cold shivers as you're talking. There is an experiment that was conducted a number of years ago by a man called Ed Tronick, who is known globally. And I've had the privilege of being in his presence. He did a magnificent experiment called the still face experiment. And if anyone has the courage and the time, I really do invite you to spend 3 minutes looking at this. It's on YouTube, electronic still face. And what it shows is a mother, they're in a laboratory, and they have a mother who is engaging with their child. The baby's about 1 year old, and you see the mother playing with the child, responsive, engaging, mutually playing, eye gazing, hand to hand. The child's cooing, the child's excited, the child's pointing. And then the researcher whispers into the mother's ear, be still. And the mother becomes like a statue. Her face goes absolutely still. That's why it's called still face. And immediately the child notices that the mother is still and there's no response. And in those 2 minutes, you see what happens to childhood development when there isn't a response from a parent. The child begins by smiling at the parent.
Yes.
He then begins to pull at the parent. No response. She or he then begins to point to where they used to look and they used to play. There's no response. The child then goes into the next phase of distress, which is called squealing. The child squeals. No response. The child then loses its posture, begins to collapse. The child looks away and begins to cry and howl, and then eventually totally looks away. And at that stage, they say to the mother, go back and, play with the child. But in real life, the child would then crawl away into a corner, and eventually the child dies from neglect. And that's the non-responsiveness, what you're talking about, when there is absolutely the still face that's presented. When you have a parent who is non-responsive, and now I want to be really clear, as I do in my therapy room, we're not here ever to bash parents, because we know, and especially in our country, We have parents who come from trauma. We've got an enormous amount of intergenerational trauma, plus ongoing, as you were talking about, political trauma that happens every single day. When there is a child who is ill, that parent cannot respond appropriately to the other children. When there's a parent who has depression, mental illness, alcoholism, substance abuse, that parent isn't able to be responsive to the child. When there is a child who is particularly disabled, for example, or is in hospital, has medical trauma, and the parent is absent, the other children become neglected. And they too, inadvertently, not because of the fault of the parent, will suffer enormously from abandonment. If there are more than 3 children in a family, there is no way that a parent is able to parent more than 3 children. No, and I've got people who've got 7 and even 14. They come from one of 11, one of 14 children, right? There's no way that you can expect a parent or parents even to be able to parent. So there is a huge amount of neglect and abandonment. And these children, and we who are those children, grow up, and intergenerationally we pass on the enormous amount of pain and lack of ability to be intimate and to be present with ourselves, with the partner, and certainly with our own children as well.
Tell me what happens when the parent is told to re-engage, right? So the parent was given the directive to have still face.
Yeah.
The child goes into this existential sort of crisis, which I absolutely get. And then the parent is told to re-engage.
Yeah.
What is happening to the child at that level when the parent tries to re-engage? What happens to the child's sense of, I don't know, of continuity? Does the child trust the parent?
So it depends on the time. Obviously, this is an experiment, so this doesn't go for longer than 2 minutes, and the child immediately re-engages again. So other experiments have been done. So back in the day, if you want me to go on, I'll give you more information. Back in the day, parents were not allowed to be in hospital when their children were ill, right? And this had profound mental health issues on children. And the entire policy around the world has changed when our parents are made to be in a hospital room with their child when they are hospitalized, because the impact of those long absences were profoundly detrimental to the child and obviously to the parent, to the attachment to the parent. It was sometimes irreparable.
Give us a call, 011-883-0702, your experience of familial rejection and the trauma that is connected to that. I'd love to hear from you, 011-883-0702. What are the remedies, Dr. Eve? I mean, are there any remedies? Is the trauma reversible? Can it be healed in any way?
Oh, there's so much work that needs to happen. Yeah, in the old days, a few years ago, it was believed that if you had this anxious or insecure attachment, that was it for life. But we know now, today, the brain is very plastic and flexible. And with work, there's a lot of healing. And paradoxically, perhaps, the most healing thing for somebody who's experienced that amount of neglect and abandonment is to be able to have a safe, intimate relationship or a safe friendship or a dog. Animals are profoundly important in healing because they provide exactly what their child or the adult needs. So people who I work with have dogs or horses. And the consistency, the predictability, the feeling that I've got somebody who is always by my side is a great, what we call buffer, protective factor for children. So having a really good friend who's going to be reliable, predictable, and safe is going to go a long way to rewiring your brain. Having a partner, if you can tolerate it in the beginning, having a partner who watches your back and is safe may feel very threatening in the beginning. You can't really trust that. And if you do allow yourself to trust it, that really gives you wonderful protection to be able to feel safe in the world again.
It appears that the faculty that rejection or betrayal most injures is trust.
Absolutely. We call it safety, right? If you're not able to feel safe, there's no way you can ever be in a relationship. And then people will say, oh, well, I'm okay on my own. I don't need anyone. I can do this on my own. And the longing is, and that's because they're just returning into a state of trauma that they're used to. But the longing, as we as humans know, the longing is for social connection. The longing is for connection. But the difficulty and the challenge and the utter fear is for connection again. And how do I feel safe? If you think about it, Aubrey, it makes sense that if you cannot feel safe or trusting of your primary parent, how do you ever feel safe or trusting with anybody else?
Let's talk to Sipho Sihle in Midrand. Sipho, hi.
Yes, sir. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks, man. Go ahead.
Yes. Will it be okay if I mix the Zulu and English?
Yeah, go ahead. I'll try and translate where I can.
Okay, because I usually feel comfortable speaking like that. Reason being, I just want to raise an issue regarding, to raise the point regarding indaba enikhuluma ngayo about the trauma for the children of being rejected. Mina personally, I have experienced that which you're talking about currently, because I grew up without ubaba no mama. My mother and my father, they were absent. To the point that up until today, it's hard for me to just fully forgive them. Sometimes I feel like I've forgiven them, but every time I keep talking about the things that happened to me in the past.
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to say is, sometimes it even becomes difficult to find a solution, to find the right person to speak to regarding such things. Because some people, they just take those things very lightly. Sometimes you run into abantu who will listen to you and understand you.
Yeah, yeah.
So I just chipped in when I came in when the topic was already in the middle. I'm not sure where you started, guys, but I just wanted to have an input on the topic.
Sure. Well, thank you very much, Sipho Sihle. The conversation really is about the trauma of rejection. And Dr. Eve mentioned a number of areas where rejection can take place. But she allowed me to choose this particular subject of rejection by family members, or familial rejection, and the trauma that is associated with that. And clearly you've had that experience. Why did your parents disappear from your life, Sipho Sihle?
If I may tell you the truth, I'm still looking for the answers, because all of them, my mother, my father, passed away already when I was a child. But I get to know my father when I was 14 years. He passed away when I was 18 years.
Yes.
I get to know my mother when I was 18 years, and he passed away when I was 13 years.
And during that time, who did you live with? During the absence of your parents?
My grandmother.
Oh, your grandmother. Okay.
Was the one that was more like a father and a mother.
Yes, she played the parental role for you. And do you have any insight as to why your parents were not present in your life?
Okay, for me, I would just say my mother's case, I don't know, because she used to disappear. And don't know because I was a child. She just only came back when she was sick and about to die, and she passed away, and I was 13 years of age.
Yeah.
And then my father was living around it, not like around. Let me say maybe, for example, if you know Johannesburg very well, let me say maybe I live in Soweto, and my father lives in Johannesburg South. But I grew up not knowing him until I was 24 years of age.
Yeah.
I had to write for Kumbule Kaya to find him.
Yes. All right, Sipho Sihle in Midrand. Let's hear what Dr. Eve has to say. By the way, Kumbule Kaya, Dr. Eve, is a very, very popular show. I'm not sure on which channel anymore. I'm not sure it's on the SABC channels or any of the other channels. But it's really about trying to help people, family members who have been alienated for many years, reconnect. It's a powerful show. It's been running for many, 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 many years. And it's such a brilliant, powerful show, because it's really gritty and really, really about the raw human experience of loss and, I suppose, regaining connection. But what do you make of Sipho Sihle's experience?
Actually, the first thing that came up for me is not why should you forgive them? I mean, stop trying to forgive them. They betrayed you. You know, they didn't do their job. They abandoned you. They need to ask you forgiveness. Well, they're no longer, but they needed to ask you forgiveness. They didn't do their job. So move out of trying to find a part of you that can forgive. Rather grieve for what you didn't get. Rather grieve for the loss of parenting and care that you didn't get, that you should have got. And I'm so, so pleased that you had a grandmother that could provide that for you. It's so frequent, Aubrey, how grandmothers, the incredible role the grandmothers play. It's either a grandmother or a dog who is there to protect a child, or a child will run to a grandmother or have their dog with them. So I'm very pleased that you did have that. And it's interesting that Sipho went to go find his dad. His dad didn't go and find him. And that's always like that. That's what the research shows as well, is that kids will go and look. They go back and they look for a parent. It's just an intrinsic, innate need. No matter how much molestation or abuse there was or rejection there was, the child is the one who will keep going to find that parent. So I'm really heartsore for you. I'm sorry that you had that absence in your life.
So I had a conversation with my grandmother about what I felt for many, many years was my father's absence. And like many of us, we grow up with our grandmothers because because our parents are gone. They either gone looking for work, or, so our grandmothers usually are the people that take care of us.
Yeah.
And I think in the conversation that I had, she could sense my anger towards my father, who happened to be her son. And one of the things that she said to me that brought me around, because I felt a sense of deep betrayal, especially when my father remarried and married somebody else, and started a whole another family, and my feeling was that he had abandoned us, and from where I stood, he seemed to be more present with his second family than he was with us. So there was deep feelings of betrayal, because I felt like he'd betrayed us, he'd left us, and I saw how, at least from where I stood, they were happy with the new family, and we were abandoned. We had to sort of live off the scraps of other people. We had clothes that were hand-me-downs. We'd look at the other people and we'd think, wow, look at those people living in our house, and and we were very angry. One of the things that at least helped me from a conversation that I had with my grandmother was that she said that your father is a little boy who never grew up and never understood the trauma of separating with you, because he was too busy perhaps trying to survive himself. You, on the other hand, were the experiencer of the pain of the rejection that you felt. Is it possible that your father's rejection of you was what you experienced, but not necessarily his intention? And I said, but I have no other reality other than the experience that I have. And she said to me that is probably because his father, my husband, abandoned us. And he was gone because he too had, it was that whole thing of going and living wherever the work was.
Yeah.
Yeah. And your father grew up under that same reality. And for him, that was the norm. That was the normal thing. He didn't realize and understand that you would experience it as rejection. And even if he experienced it as rejection from his father, he understood that to be the norm. That was the normal thing. That's what it was.
Yeah.
For you, it is now also something that is a norm, but the pain that you feel, in the sense, the trauma and the anger that you feel, should be what helps you understand that you can't do that to your sons.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't, and I'm looking for the right word, but the one that arises in my mind, if you don't forgive him, you will not have closed the gap that continues the cycle of this kind of behavior.
Mm.
And from that point of view, I worked hard to learn to forgive him. And then that led me to a position where I started to try and understand him and not just judge him. And I developed a friendship with my father, which I'm glad I did, because just before he died, we really deeply connected. I developed a friendship with my dad that made me realize and understand him as a man, not as just my father. And I could relate to him as a man and understood what he knew. And then understood that if I knew, if what he knows and what he knew was all I had, I probably would have behaved the same way too. And what that did for me is that it brought about a closure of that episode. The trauma started to get a sense of healing. And I could actually mourn him when he died.
Mm.
So I hear you when you say the reflex should not necessarily be to seek to forgive. But I would argue it should be to seek to understand. Not just from your point of view, the experience that you have, but from the point of view of the person who didn't have enough emotional, intellectual capacity to understand the effect of his actions. Because for them, it was just about survival.
Sure.
It was just about survival and the idea that I am surviving, but I have sired children. I live on through my children. And he didn't realize that he lives on through my children, but the trauma also lives on to my children. I simply had the grace to be able to understand, because of his mother, the need for me to rise above the limitations of the experience of the moment from my point of view only. And I think that had I not gone through the process of learning to know him and trying to understand that, so this guy had just these limitations, these understandings, I probably still would have been a candidate for the infliction of the same trauma to the next generation. I'm simply saying, maybe there's another side to this.
No, Aubrey, look, it worked for you. And I also want to we do need to put it into a socio-political and economic geographical context, because life is very different now. Law is very different now to what it was, probably I'm your father's age, and probably he was a bit older than me, than what was understood back then. There wasn't an understanding, first of all, of trauma. There was definitely no understanding of even language around that. That's really very new. Also, it was normative to have that situation happening where there was, as you say, around survival. So there has to be an understanding of that. And what language that we use today as trauma therapists is that of compassion.
Yes.
It's about having a compassion for one's parents. When one has moved through a process, and we do this therapeutically, of first being able to say, there's no judgment on my parent. There is an acknowledgement that this is the losses I had because of my absent parents, and I need to be able to have deep compassion for how I've suffered. And once I am feeling I have compassion for myself, it automatically happens. The next phase is automatically I have compassion for my father because he too suffered. But it has to begin with the acknowledgement that I have suffered as a result of the abandonment and what I didn't get as a child. And then one is able to move into, I get it, that this was also difficult for him, because none of us want to hate our parents. We want to be able to still feel connected, whether they're alive or dead. And it's very important that we are able to see parents in that way. But first and foremost, to be able to acknowledge the missing, the impact of the missing that has happened to us, because then we become very aware of not to repeat the trauma again.
Yeah, absolutely. Whew. Dr. Eve, yet another, shall we call it courageous conversation. Maybe one day we can talk about the trauma of rejection at a collective level. When a collective of people feel they have been rejected by those that they've entrusted with the governance of their resources, whether it's government, whether it is companies. Perhaps it's a conversation to have, and what it is that is available to us as the people who are the victims of that rejection and betrayal.
Yeah, and the helplessness that one feels, or we feel, we think we're helpless around it. And look what you just did. I'm going to just kind of close with what you started, of how you've taken a very different segue into the abandonment by Trump, where you see it. And it was also at the time of apartheid, when South Africa was rejected. We found a creative way to be able to manage on our own. And so once again, here we are, it's woken us up to being able to turn inwards and to say, we need to be taking care of our own. We need to stop all of the messing around, the theft, the thievery that's happening here, and to actually be more respectful of taxpayers' money and to be able to provide for our people ourselves. Yeah.
Dr. Eve, thank you so much for joining us. I always ask you, how do people get in touch with you?
Oh, well, I've got a very exciting new place. You can join me on the Daily Maverick. I've just started a column there. So find me there. I'm going to kind of be posting Dear Dr. Eve, and you can write to me and send in a Dear Dr. Eve anonymously, but you can read me in the Daily Maverick as well as obviously on all social media platforms.
Thank you very much, Dr. Eve. Much appreciated.